The rain pounded Manhattan as if trying to wash away the city's sins. Ava Blake, her hands shaking on the wheel, sped through the empty avenues. The rhythm of the windshield wipers blended with the frantic beat of her heart. Outside, headlights followed her like the eyes of a predator. It was Zane Varelli, and she knew that if she stopped, her life would end right there. The tires sliced through puddles as flashes of lightning lit up her face in the rearview mirror. Red eyes and steady breathing, a soul in pieces. Ava wasn't just running from a man, she was running from years of fear and silence. Every turn was an attempt to rewrite her own fate, but the past had decided it wouldn't let her go. Inside the car, the smell of gasoline and the metallic taste in her mouth painted a scene of pure despair. A distant crash made her grip the steering wheel tighter. "Don't look back," whispered the voice in her head, the same one that had kept her alive for so long. But the reflection of the headlights behind her cut through the darkness like a warning. He was still there. Zane rammed his car against hers, forcing her to lose control. The rain grew heavier, blurring the line between reality and delirium. Ava felt the car skid, but she pressed harder on the gas. She couldn't go back. She couldn't live another second under the rule of a man who mistook love for ownership. The whole city seemed to breathe against her, like a maze with no way out. The memory of the last slap burned more than fear itself. That wasn't love, it was a sentence. And now, every drop of rain on her windshield felt like a promise of freedom. Sirens wailed in the distance, a distorted symphony reminding her that time was running out. Her body was exhausted, but her soul was starving for liberation. She sped through neon-lit avenues, surrounded by shadows. Billboards reflected her image, a lone woman fighting the impossible. The city looked like a glass stage about to shatter. For a moment, she thought of stopping, but something deep inside whispered, "Keep going." And she did, guided by instinct and the fear of what would happen if he caught her. The radio hissed, mixing static with an old love song. The irony made her laugh through tears. While the world slept, she was waging an invisible war between survival and the pain of loving someone who almost destroyed her. The fuel gauge neared empty, but her heart refused to give up. Ava pressed the pedal one last time. Ahead, the traffic light blinked red, but she didn't slow down. Time seemed to move in sync with her breath, slower, heavier. Destiny waited at the next intersection, hidden between thunder and shadow. Ava didn't know it yet, but that crossroads would become her turning point, where fear would meet something even more dangerous than love: power. The red light glowed like a divine warning, but Ava didn't see it. The world had turned into a blur of rain, lights, and terror. The screech of brakes tore through the night, followed by a crash that seemed to split the air itself. Metal against metal, glass against concrete. And for a brief moment, everything stopped. It was the end. Or perhaps, the beginning of something she would never fully understand. The Toyota Corolla spun across the wet asphalt, sliding for several yards before crashing against the curb. The smell of gasoline and gunpowder filled the air, mixing with the hot steam from the engine. Ava coughed, dizzy, her face bruised and her body trapped by the seatbelt. Outside, the faint sound of a car door opening echoed through the rain like a sentence. She wasn't alone. The other vehicle, a black Range Rover Velar, had stopped a few meters ahead. 3 men stepped out. The rain poured down over expensive suits and polished leather shoes that caught the glare of the headlights. In the middle of them, a tall man with a cold stare walked toward her. Cassian Moretti. Each step sounded like the rhythm of something inevitable, as if fate itself had collided along with the cars. Ava tried to open the door, but it was jammed. The shattered glass let rainwater flow onto her lap. Cassian stopped right in front of her, motionless, observing. There was no anger in his eyes, only something deeper, more calculated. With a small gesture, he signaled one of the men, who ripped the door open. The metallic sound echoed through the night, and Ava felt herself being pulled out, the cold slicing her skin like blades. His voice was low, steady. $8,000? No, 80,000. The words didn't feel real. Ava tried to speak, to explain, but Cassian silenced her with a single look. He didn't seem like a man who tolerated excuses. The wind whipped his long coat, and the rain turned the scene into something surreal, a tragedy dressed in elegance. Ava just trembled, unsure if she was alive or trapped somewhere between worlds. Behind her, the Corolla was hissing smoke. The twisted hood looked like a wounded body. Cassian leaned down, examining the wreck with surgical calm. "You're lucky you're still breathing," he muttered, emotionless. Ava couldn't tell if it was a threat or a statement. A flash of lightning lit up his face, revealing a man used to controlling chaos, and somehow, that terrified her more than the crash itself. Zane was gone. No sign of his car, no sirens in the distance. It was as if hell had swallowed her pursuer, leaving only the aftermath behind. Ava looked around, disoriented, searching for answers in the dark. Cassian watched her every move, his gaze heavy, a mix of curiosity and power. The rain began to fade, but the silence that followed was heavier than the storm. Cassian took a step forward, extended his hand, and said something that would echo in her mind for a long time. "From now on, you owe me your life." That was the moment Ava realized she hadn't escaped danger. She had collided with another one, and that man, with the calm voice and unreadable eyes, would become both her ruin and her salvation. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of smoke and tension. Ava sat on the wet curb, staring at the Range Rover, the dented hood, the cracked windshield. Cassian remained silent, analyzing every detail like a chess player planning his next move. His men stood still, waiting for orders, like armed shadows. And in the middle of that chaos, his gaze rested on her with a disturbing calm. Ava's body was trembling, but not from the cold. There was something about Cassian that froze the air around him. He stepped closer, lowering himself slowly until their faces were close enough for her to catch the faint scent of wood and gunpowder on his skin. "Your name?" he asked. Ava answered in a fragile voice. Cassian nodded, and somehow that small gesture carried more authority than any threat could. One of his men handed him a tablet. Cassian typed something, glanced at the screen, then looked back at her. Ava Blake, 23 years old, physical therapist, 2 jobs, clean record, no living relatives. Her face went pale. How did he know all that? Cassian lifted his gaze, locking eyes with her. "I always find out who crosses my path," he said quietly, as if stating an unbreakable rule. The silence between them was thick. Ava wanted to run, but her legs refused to move. Cassian gave a faint smile, the kind that never reaches the eyes. "You caused $80,000 in damage. You'll pay me back, but not with money." The words hit like a verdict. Ava tried to protest, but Cassian raised his hand, and she fell silent. There was something final about that gesture, something that left no room for resistance. Zane was still gone, as if he'd vanished into the rain. Cassian noticed her anxious glance and murmured, "The man who is chasing you won't be coming back." His tone sounded like both a promise and a sentence. Ava didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. For the first time, she realized the danger she'd escaped might be smaller than the one now standing before her. He reached out and helped her up. His touch was firm, cold, but strangely protective. The world seemed to slow down around them. Cassian looked at his wrecked car and said flatly, "Get in. You're not going anywhere alone." Ava hesitated, but his presence had a magnetic pull impossible to resist. Each step she took toward the SUV felt like erasing the life she once had. Inside the car, silence filled the space. Cassian stared out the window while one of his men drove. Ava watched his reflection in the glass, trying to read what hid behind that stoic expression. Power? Pain? Maybe both. When the car turned onto a dark road leading north, she finally understood she wasn't being rescued. She was being taken. The engine purred like a restrained beast. Cassian said nothing more. He just looked at her once before turning his head and whispering something in Italian, too softly for her to catch. Ava closed her eyes for a moment. The fear was still there, but something else began to stir within it, a strange feeling that her life had finally spun out of her control and would never be the same again. The road ended before tall iron gates. Cameras turned silently, tracking the car's every move. As the gates opened, Ava saw the Moretti estate for the first time, a labyrinth of warm lights and towering windows glowing against the night. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried the scent of fear. It was too beautiful to be safe, and far too quiet to ever feel like home. As she stepped inside, the cold marble reflected her trembling image. Armed men moved through the halls with measured steps, as if danger were just another part of their routine. Cassian removed his coat without saying a word and looked at her for a moment. "You're safe now," he said, but the way he spoke, the word made it sound different, as if safe meant owned. Ava simply nodded, trying to understand what kind of place she had walked into. Hours passed. Doctors, servants, constant surveillance. Every corner of the house seemed to be watching her. Ava noticed there were no locks on the inside of the doors, only cameras. When Cassian returned, he wore a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his gaze steady on her. "Zane Varelli owed the Moretti family a lot of money, and he used you as collateral." Ava's stomach turned. The world began to spin slowly around her. His words landed like a muffled gunshot. "You were the payment." Cassian stepped closer, placing both hands on the glass table, his eyes fixed on her pale face. "He didn't love you, Ava. He sold you." The sentence cut through the air, and for a moment, everything went silent. Even the ticking clock seemed to stop. Ava covered her mouth, fighting back a sob. The truth was an open wound. Cassian showed no pity. He just studied her, like someone inspecting a damaged jewel. "You were being watched." For months, his voice was low and firm, but there was something else beneath it, a hint of restrained anger. "I knew Zane would try to hand you over eventually. I just didn't expect to find you like this." He looked away, exhaling slowly. In that moment, Ava understood none of this had been an accident. The weight of his words closed in on her. The thought of being followed, studied, analyzed, made her chest tighten. "So, I was never really alone?" she whispered, barely audible. Cassian didn't answer. He simply stared out the window. The distant city lights flickered in his eyes, as if inside him there was also a battlefield between what was right and what was inevitable. Ava sat down, her body tense. The fear that once had Zane's name now belonged to Cassian Moretti. He claimed to be protecting her, but every instinct told her there was something deeper and far more dangerous beneath his calm. "You'll stay here," he ordered, turning slowly toward her, "until I decide what to do with you." His tone was cold, but there was a shadow of concern in his eyes that betrayed him. When he left, the echo of the double doors closing sounded like the end of a verdict. Ava was alone, surrounded by luxury, yet imprisoned by fate. The city outside slept, and she realized that for the first time, the real danger didn't come from the streets, but from the golden walls that now confined her. Somewhere in the house, Cassian watched the security cameras silent, like a man trying to understand his own mistake. Morning at the Moretti estate didn't feel real. Rays of golden light filtered through heavy curtains, glinting off crystal chandeliers, as if trying to soften the secrets hidden inside those walls. Ava woke in a spacious room, wrapped in silk sheets, facing a quiet garden. Everything was beautiful, organized, and suffocating. Freedom now smelled of expensive perfume and constant surveillance. Ava watched in silence. The same man who once commanded fear now looked strangely vulnerable. When he noticed her standing there, he didn't flinch. He simply looked at her, wordless, and kept playing. The music spoke for him of guilt, of loss, of something time hadn't erased. The amber glow of the lamps cast long shadows on the walls, and for a moment, the two of them seemed completely alone in the world. After a few minutes, Cassian stopped. "I used to play for my brother, before everything fell apart," he said, his voice rough. Ava stepped closer, careful, as if afraid to break something fragile. Cassian didn't look away. "You want to understand who I am? Then understand what I've lost." His tone carried honesty and a wall she couldn't climb. A man torn between confession and the illusion of control. She sat across from him, unsure what to say. "Why did you bring me here, Cassian?" The question hung in the air. He drew in a deep breath before answering, Because you're the mistake fate forced me to fix. Ava didn't understand. He turned his gaze away, ending the conversation. The sound of rain filled the silence again, the same rain that, months before, had tied their lives together in a collision neither could erase. The days that followed brought a strange calm. Cassian still treated her with authority, but something in his manner had shifted. At times, she caught him watching her longer than he should, a hint of concern hidden behind indifference. When Ava cut her finger while cooking, he appeared within seconds, gently taking her hand. "I don't want you bleeding for me too," he murmured before leaving, not giving her a chance to reply. His silence carried truths too heavy to name. Ava began to see what lay beneath the suit and power, a man worn down by years of burden. A man who didn't sleep, who carried the weight of old choices. She noticed how he stared out the window at the city below, as if searching for redemption in a world that refused to forgive. Little by little, fear turned into curiosity, and curiosity became the danger of caring too much. One late afternoon, Cassian took her to the terrace. The wind tangled her hair, and for a brief second, he allowed himself to smile. "What do you see down there?" he asked. Ava answered without thinking. A world that fears you." He nodded. "That's how it should be." But his eyes told a different story, one of loneliness, buried deep beneath layers of power, and he no longer seemed able to control. That night, as Ava lay in bed, she realized something inside her had shifted. Cassian Moretti wasn't just the man who had trapped her, he was the man who made her question her hatred. And somewhere between fear and desire, something silent, dangerous, and inevitable began to bloom. A feeling that asked for no permission, and that would soon put everything at risk. Midnight fell heavy over the Moretti estate. The sky stood still, no wind, no stars, the kind of silence that comes before disaster. Ava was asleep when the first explosion shattered her window. Red lights flooded the hallway, followed by screams and muffled gunfire. She ran to the door, heart racing. Chaos had arrived, and Cassian was nowhere to be found. Outside, masked men stormed the gardens, breaking through gates and fences. Dogs barked in panic as the alarm screamed across the estate like a metallic lament. Ava ran down the stairs in terror, stumbling over her own feet, until she saw Cassian emerge from the shadows, gun in hand, his face smeared with anger. He shouted an order, and his men formed a living wall around her. Hell had arrived. Rurik Medved. The name hissed through the radio, and Cassian repeated it like a curse. The Russian kingpin had finally crossed the line. Explosions shook the walls as the rain poured down again, heavy and relentless, turning the gardens into a battlefield. Ava watched, frozen, as the man who once seemed carved from ice now moved with fury, as if fighting for something more than power. Rafael Costa appeared behind her, pulling her down behind a column. "Stay low," he ordered, his voice steady. Ava tried to see Cassian, but smoke clouded everything. The sound of gunfire mixed with the rain hitting the marble. She wanted to run, but she knew leaving would mean letting him die. Fear and instinct merged into something new, courage. Cassian pushed forward through the main hall, firing with deadly precision. The lights flickered, and every flash revealed the tense face of a man who refused to lose. Ava, hidden, watched with her heart torn between terror and awe. The mafia boss was now a wounded soldier defending his home, and perhaps defending her. Even from afar, the sound of his breath reached her like a silent vow. Suddenly, an intruder appeared behind Cassian, aiming at his back. Ava didn't think. She grabbed a piece of metal from the floor and struck him hard. The man fell, his body hitting the marble with a heavy thud, blood splattering across her face. Cassian turned in shock for a split second. "I told you to stay hidden," he shouted, but his eyes said something else: pride and fear of losing her. With Raphael's help, Ava dragged Cassian into a reinforced room, alarms still wailing in the distance. He was bleeding from the shoulder, but refused to stop. "This isn't just an attack. It's a message," he muttered through clenched teeth. Ava held his hand for the first time, without hesitation. "Then we'll answer it," she said. Cassian stared at her, and in that look, A silent pact was born. When the gunfire finally stopped, the mansion was in ruins. The air reeked of gunpowder and metal, and Cassian's eyes burned with restrained fury. "Rurik Medved will pay for this," he said, his voice steady. But beneath that certainty, something darker lingered, a shadow behind his pride. Ava could feel it. This attack was only the beginning. Something inside those walls was still about to collapse. And it wouldn't just be brick and stone. Morning crept in slowly, carrying the scent of smoke and gunpowder through the halls. Ava walked among the wreckage, her heart heavy. The floor still bore the marks of battle blood, broken glass, silence. Cassian, dressed in a dark suit with a bandaged shoulder, stood on the balcony, staring at the damage. "This wasn't just an attack," he said quietly, without turning. "Someone opened the doors from the inside." And those words froze the air. Ava tried to make sense of it. "From the inside?" Cassian turned slowly, his gaze locked on hers. "Yes, someone I trusted." The words fell between them like a blade. Rafael Costa entered the room, his expression tense, reporting details of the attack. Cassian listened in silence, but something had changed in his eyes, a suspicion beginning to take shape, quiet and dangerous. Over the next few days, the tension grew heavier. Cassian sealed off the mansion, ordered every security system checked, and had every employee questioned. Ava saw the exhaustion etched into his face, but there was something deeper to mistrust. He slept little, spoke less. At night, the house itself seemed to breathe fear. And through it all, Rafael remained close, too close. One night, Ava woke to the sound of footsteps outside her door. She followed them down the hall and saw Rafael on the phone, his voice low, speaking in Russian. She couldn't understand the words, but one name was clear enough to freeze her blood: Rurik. She pressed herself against the wall, her heart racing, listening to every syllable. The man who claimed to be Cassian's right hand wasn't who he said he was. By morning, she found him in the kitchen, making coffee as if nothing had happened. His smile was fake, his eyes cold. "Sleep well, Miss Blake?" he asked, politeness laced with poison. Ava forced a calm expression, but inside, she was already planning. She knew she had to tell Cassian, but also that if she chose the wrong moment, someone would die. Maybe her. Later that day, she waited until Cassian was alone in his office. Then she told him everything. The words spilled out fast and trembling like someone carrying an explosive. Cassian listened without interrupting, his hands clasped on the desk. When she finished, he simply said, "I already know." The calm in his voice was worse than a shout. "Rafael is testing me. Now, we'll test him." The plan began that same night. Cassian told Ava to act as if nothing had changed, to smile at the traitor, to make him believe she was still unaware. The trap was simple and lethal. Turn the spy into bait. Ava hesitated, but Cassian's gaze was firm and beneath it, protective. "Trust me," he said. And for the first time, she truly did. As the mansion slept, Cassian watched Rafael through the security feeds, his eyes fixed on the screens. Ava, alone in her room, felt the weight of deception pounding in her chest. Outside, the wind tugged at the curtains, carrying the warning of an approaching storm. The betrayal had been exposed, but the game was far from over. And for the first time, Ava wasn't just a pawn, she was part of the board. The night felt heavy, thick, as if the air itself knew what was about to happen. Ava looked at her reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back. The black dress, the steady gaze, the hair pinned in a tight bun. Nothing remained of the woman who had once fled Manhattan. Cassian watched from a distance, unable to hide the mix of pride and fear in his eyes. "He'll believe you," he said, voice low and rough. "But first, you need to believe in me." The mansion was silent, except for the metallic clicks of guns being checked. Cassian moved among his men, issuing orders with surgical calm. Ava watched him, her chest tightening. Every gesture of his felt like an unspoken goodbye. "You're the only one he'll let get close," he explained. "Rafael will hand you over to Rurik, and we'll use that." The weight of courage pressed on her shoulders like burning iron. Before she left, Cassian stepped closer. The world seemed to stop. "If anything goes wrong, I'll come for you, no matter where you are." His hand brushed her face, and even that brief touch set fire at everything she'd been trying to hide. Ava wanted to answer, but there were no words strong enough. She simply nodded. The plan was already in motion, and once again, fate would be decided under the rain. Hours later, Raphael drove her to an old warehouse on the edge of the city. The air smelled of rust and betrayal. Armed men surrounded her, and when the doors opened, the name Cassian despised took shape. Rurik Medved. Tall, merciless, with the smile of someone who'd killed without regret. "So this is the woman who made Moretti lose control," he said, stepping closer. The war now had a face. Ava kept her composure. She faked fear, submission. While Rurik spoke, she studied everything: exits, cameras, guards, blind spots. Cassian had taught her, the eyes are the sharpest weapon. And when Raphael handed over the fake documents, she knew the end had begun. "Good girl," Rurik murmured. Ava only smiled. Inside, she was counting the seconds until the strike began. At that same moment, across the city, Cassian listened to her through a hidden transmitter inside her necklace. Every word, every breath cut through the silence of the command room. 30 seconds, one of his men said. Cassian closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. "Hold on, Ava." And for the first time, there was pleading in his voice. The war was no longer his alone. The warehouse lights flickered, and Ava knew it was time. She dropped to the floor just as the first explosion tore through the walls. Smoke filled the air, followed by screams and chaos. Cassian stormed in from the north side, his face streaked with ash and fury. Gunfire echoed like thunder. Ava ran toward him, and when their eyes met in the middle of the chaos, there was no fear, only a promise. But the war wasn't over. Amid fire and debris, Cassian froze at the sight of something. Raphael, the traitor, was running, clutching a briefcase. Cassian raised his gun, hesitating for a single second. That was enough for fate to shift. A gunshot rang out, and time seemed to shatter. Ava screamed his name, but her voice was swallowed by the flames. The game had changed once more. Smoke still filled the air when Ava heard a sound she thought she'd never hear again, a whisper through the chaos. A voice she once knew only in dreams. "Ava?" She turned, her heart stopping mid-beat. Among Rurik's men, a face emerged from the shadows and time ceased to exist. It was her brother, the brother she'd believed dead for 7 years. All color drained from her face, leaving only shock and pain. Cassian tried to reach her, but Ava rushed forward, stumbling through debris and gunfire. "It can't be you," she whispered, her voice breaking. The man standing before her, the same one she had mourned at his funeral, was alive. But something was wrong. His eyes were cold, stripped of the light they once held. "He saved me," her brother said, pointing at Rurik, "while you left me to die." The words cut through her like an invisible blade. Cassian understood before she did. Her brother had become Rurik's right hand and enemy. Ava felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. "You don't know what he did to me," she tried to say, but her voice was drowned by gunfire. Cassian moved in front of her, shielding her as flames devoured the ceiling. The reunion that should have healed her deepest wound now opened another one that would never close. Chaos consumed everything. Cassian barked orders, his men answering with precise shots. Raphael, bleeding, crawled toward the back, desperate to escape, but the past had already merged with the present. Ava watched her brother reload his gun, his expression unreadable. "Why are you doing this?" she cried, tears streaming down her face. He hesitated, and that hesitation was all Cassian needed. A gunshot rang out sharp, final. Ava's brother dropped to his knees, shock in his eyes, before collapsing soundlessly. Cassian lowered his weapon, his chest heaving, guilt hardening his face. Ava ran to the body, calling the name he had forgotten to answer to. Her sobs blended with the crackle of the flames. Cassian reached for her, but she pushed him away. "You killed him," she screamed, and the echo of those words tore through him like shrapnel. But the danger wasn't over. Rurik, wounded and furious, emerged from behind the containers, gun aimed straight at Ava. Cassian tried to react, but it was too late. The bullet cut through the air, and once again, fate chose its cruelest path. Ava dodged on instinct, grabbed a fallen knife, and with the precision of a surgeon, drove it deep into Rurik's chest. His body fell slowly, collapsing like an empire reduced to ashes. The silence that followed was unreal. Only the crackling of fire remained where screams had once filled the air. Ava fell to her knees, her hands covered in blood. Cassian approached her cautiously, caught between guilt and relief. "It's over," he said, but his voice sounded empty. Ava lifted her gaze, eyes brimming with tears. "It never ends, Cassian," she whispered. "It never ends for people like us." Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. The night was ending, but what was born from it had no name. Cassian looked at her not as a boss, not as a savior, but as a broken man who, for the first time, didn't know what to do with his soul. And as the flames consumed the past, they both understood, when love is born from chaos, it always demands its price. 8 months had passed since the night the fire swallowed Rurik Medved's empire. Manhattan breathed again, and so did Ava Blake. Now, she lived in a penthouse of glass and light high above the city. The view was the same as before, but everything in her had changed. Fear had given way to serenity, chaos to hope. And beside her, Cassian Moretti, calmer now, his gaze no longer made of stone, was slowly relearning the meaning of the word peace. The life that had once been built on cages was now built on choices. Ava walked through the apartment with the calm of someone who had rebuilt her own destiny. Her body no longer trembled, though it still carried invisible scars. In the mirror, she saw the reflection of a different woman, stronger, more aware of her worth. "You won, even if it cost you everything," she whispered to herself, tracing the memories of every scar the past had left behind. Cassian worked in silence, turning his fortune into something that finally meant something. He founded a medical organization in her name, funded shelters for women who had survived violence, and legalized every one of his family's businesses. The empire once built on fear now sustained lives. Sometimes, Cassian said it was all for redemption. Other times, he would simply watch her and smile as if he'd finally found a reason to keep going. Ava, in her own way, started over. She returned to physical therapy, opening a small clinic in partnership with Cassian's foundation. Every patient she treated was a reminder that it was still possible to heal what once seemed beyond repair. Sometimes, when she looked at Cassian, she saw the same struggle in his eyes, that of a man trying to become worthy of a love he'd received when he least deserved it. Pain had become part of their strength. The nights were peaceful now. Cassian and Ava would share quiet dinners, saying little but feeling everything. There was comfort in the silence, a kind of love that needed no words. The past still lingered, but it no longer haunted. It only taught. When he looked at her, he saw a woman who had survived hell and learned to light her own way out. And she saw a man who had traded war for faith and change. One morning, Ava felt something different, a faint dizziness, an unexplainable emotion. The doctor confirmed it, twins. Cassian went silent for a long moment, then wrapped his arms around her without saying a word. It was as if fate, after so many trials, had finally decided to grant them a new beginning. And in that moment, the Moretti Empire found a new meaning, not one of power, but of legacy. As the sun rose over the skyline, Cassian watched her from across the room, making coffee a ritual that once seemed impossible for a man like him. Ava smiled, walking toward him. "It still feels like a dream," she said softly. Cassian replied, "Maybe it is, but it's ours." The words lingered in the air, between the scent of coffee and the gentle glow of morning. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a threat. Yet there was something Cassian still hadn't told her. A secret kept since the night of the fire. Every redemption carries the weight of the past, and his was about to surface. Ava sensed the quiet unrest behind his calm gaze, a truth waiting to be spoken. But before the silence could turn into confession, Cassian drew a deep breath, looked at her, and smiled. That night, the Manhattan sky seemed clearer than ever. The city below shimmered like a sea of stars trapped in concrete. When Ava stepped into the penthouse, the space was bathed in golden half-light. Candles flickered, white flowers lined the table, and the soft sound of a piano floated through the air. Cassian stood by the window in a dark suit. The man who had once been feared now looked simply human. She moved closer in silence. Their reflections blended on the glass, and for a moment, it was impossible to tell where the past ended and the present began. Cassian turned to her, his eyes glistening, something rare for him. I've made a lot of promises, Ava. Most of them I broke. But this one I intend to keep. His voice trembled not from fear, but from truth. Ava felt her chest tighten. He picked up a small box from the table. Inside was a simple ring, understated, yet intense, like everything they had lived through. You gave me back something I didn't even know I'd lost the chance to be a better man. His words were soft, but heavy with meaning. Ava stood still, tears gathering in her eyes. Cassian knelt, slowly, as if he understood that love isn't about haste, it's about choice. Marry me, he whispered. It wasn't a command, nor a deal. It was a plea. Ava took a deep breath, her soul expanding. She remembered the night of the rain, the crash, the fear. All of it felt distant now. The red light that once symbolized despair had become the very point where destiny met love again. She smiled, and the world seemed to stop, waiting for her answer. Cassian rose to his feet, his eyes locked on hers. The ring caught the soft light, but the real glow came from within them both. Yes, she said firmly, without hesitation. The word echoed through the room like a prayer. Cassian pulled her close, and the kiss that followed wasn't one of impulsive passion, it was one of peace, of home. A silent pact between two survivors who had learned to love without guarantees. In the days that followed, life found a new rhythm. Ava, now pregnant and engaged, watched Cassian plan their future with the same precision he once used to plan wars, but now, every decision had a new purpose: to build, not destroy. The foundation grew, the charity projects multiplied, and in his eyes, there was pride not in an empire, but in the woman who had taught him how to begin again. The nights were calm. Sometimes Cassian woke in a sweat, trapped in memories of the past, and Ava would hold him until his breathing slowed. Do you still get scared? She'd ask softly. No, he'd whisper back. Now, just have something to lose. And that was the truest thing he had ever said. Because deep down, and vulnerability walk hand in hand. And Cassian Moretti had finally learned that. As they watched the sunrise, Ava rested her head on his shoulder. Do you think destiny brought us together by chance? She asked. Cassian smiled. Destiny doesn't make mistakes, Ava. It just takes its time. Outside, the city stirred awake, but inside, time stood still. It was the end of a story that began in pain and ended in redemption, a love born from chaos and reborn in peace. And you? What did you think of this story? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Here, this story is a reminder that love can rise from chaos and change everything.